Ladies and gentlemen, Roster Watch Nation, welcome back to the epic Roster Watch podcast, brought to you by RosterWatch.com. My name is Alex Dunlap, and boy, do we have a big fish on the line here for the epic pod today. We have Deepi Sidhu. You can follow her on Twitter at DeepSlant. She is the lead writer for the HoustonTexans.com website and one of the personalities there on Texans TV, Texans Radio. If you follow the Houston Texans, you certainly know her as an insider and somebody who's just around the team constantly. That's the kind of person that we need to hear from right now. Deepi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, I'm around the team, but it looks a lot different than it has in years past with COVID-19 protocols in place and a lot of testing and a lot of routines and rituals that were not there in years past. So training camp looks very different from years past, but still just always a pleasure to cover the team, and so excited that football's underway and we're finally in training camp. I just can't believe this point is here, but here we are. From your lips to God's ears, Deepi. I swear to God, man, it's
never in doubt though, right? But here we are. We're less than 3 weeks away from kickoff of the first Thursday night game. And just, I wanted to ask you, I mean, for us, obviously, so much of our content comes from our travel schedule during this time of year. That's really been thrown into the gut pile, this year with everything going on with the pandemic. And for you, I'm sure that a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of your routines, everything's different. Like, are you having to so can you explain just to people who are just NFL fans, like what's the difference between like the levels of, because you work there with the team, for the team. Is it like, are you having to get tested every time you go in there? Like, how do you do, like, what do y'all do? How does it work?
Right. Yeah, no, they're different tiers. There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 3 OA. So depending on what tier you're in, you get tested more frequently. So the players are tier 1 and players and coaches are tier 1 and tier 2. So anyone that interacts directly with the players are in those two tiers, and they're tested. The players are tested every single day. They're still tested every single day.
Like anyone, with the nose thing, or do they?
Yeah, nasal swab, temperature checks. You have to fill out a questionnaire before you go to the stadium that says you've taken your temperature twice at home. You haven't been in contact with anyone that's had a temperature or COVID-19 symptoms. And then, when I enter the parking lot, I get my temperature checked as well. I show them the pass that I filled out my.
Well, you're still in your car?
While I'm still in my car, yes. Oh, wow. Because if I have a temperature up, they're probably going to make me turn around and go right on home. I'm not entering the facility with a temperature. But I don't need to get nasal swabbed if I'm not directly in contact with the team or the players. And so I have been doing a lot of my interviews with the players via Zoom after practice. And actually during practice, I'm allowed to go out to practice. But what we decided to do this year, which we've never done before, is to stream practice live. So we call it Texans Training Camp Live. Drew Doherty, my co-host, and myself, we're in studio. And then John Harris, who we pushed into tier 2, who does get tested every day. We let him get the nasal swab up the nose every day. He's out there on the field with the players, and he's sort of showing us a live look at practice and what he's seeing. And we're watching it on the screen. So when you're watching it from home, or, we've got people watching from all over the world, from like Ireland, from the beach, from, different places in Texas. You see Drew and I at the desk, and in the middle is a big screen of what you're seeing at camp live. You're seeing the players going through their drills. You see them warming up. You see Deshaun Watson throwing passes to some of the new guys out there on the field. You see David Johnson catching the ball and running. I mean, this is access unlike anything we've been able to offer before. But that's because usually there's fans at camp, and the fans take their own video and they take their own pictures. But since that's not the case this year, we still wanted people to feel engaged and feel like they were part of the team, and they knew this 2020 Texans roster. So that's sort of, I think, the bonus, the silver lining, if you will, out of all of it, is that through all this testing and everything, we've been able to show a side of camp and offer more access than we've ever had before to offer fans.
And of course, she's talking about Training Camp Live. That's on Facebook and on the app. I thought I was watching it on YouTube. Like, was I not watching the correct thing? I thought
it might be on. I think the older episodes, you can go back and watch them. You can go back to Facebook and watch it. I think they get pushed out everywhere because they've been really popular. And I think we started off at like 20, 30 minutes, and then we got up to 40 minutes. It's, I think people just can't get enough of what they're seeing out at camp every day.
Yeah, and then, of course, you talk about it on the Texans radio from 8 to 10 a.m. and then 6 to 7 p.m. So sort of the pregame and the postgame there for these whatever, is it 14 practices, something like this?
14 padded practices, but there'll be more practices than that. But, we actually started covering camp from the first day of padded practice, which was August 14th, Friday, August 14th. They'd actually been in this ramp up period before then where it was like a condensed off-season workout program, a lot of workouts and stretching. So to us, that wasn't really camp and what people wanted to see. People want to see when you actually put on the pads and go 11 on 11. That was when our coverage began of camp. But we've got about 3 weeks of that, less than 3 weeks now until the kickoff at Kansas City.
It's great. It's terrific access. I think some teams are using, I feel like, and I know you can't comment on this, but I feel like some teams are using this time where fans aren't allowed, media is kind of not allowed to kind of hide what's going on and not let anybody see it. And so I'm glad that I'm glad that the Texans, I'm sure that there's stuff that they're holding back, but I'm glad they're giving us at least a little peek, man. Like,
we're not giving away any competitive advantages. Let me tell you that they're not showing any true formations there. I think they're still trying to get an idea of what each of the guys can do. And a lot of times, the team is in a ramp up period right now. So like JJ Watt has not been out there for padded practices. That's not what it's going to look like in week one. That's not what the Texans look like in week one. JJ Watt is going to be on the field.
Sure.
Will Fuller is very limited when he's out there. There's a lot of guys that have rest days. You've got your veteran guys that get their rest days right now because everything is just pushing towards week one. This coaching staff wants players to be healthy for week one. And without preseason games, there's really no way to evaluate your undrafted guys, get your rookies up to speed, teach them what they normally would have learned in rookie minicamp. That all has to happen now. So you've got a lot of guys trying to get reps, and then you've got your free agents that you signed, the big name free agents that are going to be a big part of this offense and defense. They have to get their time in as well. You've got to get Randall Cobb, you've got to get Brandon Cooks, you've got to get David Johnson. You got to have all of them develop their chemistry with Deshaun Watson and the O-line on the field. So a lot has to happen in these next few weeks of camp. And I mean, they're not really game planning just yet. So whatever we're showing is not really going to be a competitive advantage. There's no true formations or anything like that. When that happens, trust me, we will not be showing that live because the coaching staff would definitely not like us doing that right now in camp. So that's why we're able to do it right now, just because it is such a different training camp than we've had before.
Us fantasy degenerates, we don't care about the formations and stuff. We care about who's.
I know.
We care about who's looking good, who's gonna be catching footballs, running the football and stuff. So so just as far as that, and before I ask you about this, just one other quick thing I'm just curious about. It just now popped in my head. But being somebody who's a Texans insider and so close to the team, how surprised were you with the DeAndre Hopkins trade? Did you know it was coming? Like, and what was the first thing you thought? Were you surprised? Like, was that just like whenever you follow a team so closely, you cover a team, and just a superstar like that gets traded? What was that like?
I mean, definitely, it was definitely a surprise. Trust me, they don't call me up when they're about to make a trade. Sometimes you hear rumblings of stuff, but it was in the off season, and we were already home because COVID had shut down our building. So sometimes when you're in the building, you run across people, you talk to people on that side of the building, you sort of hear rumblings and you sort of know what's going on. Certainly we were not in the building at that time. And so, I learned about it on Twitter like everyone else did. And of course it's a surprise. I mean, looking back, I'm sure the signs were there that, they were looking to sort of, rework that contract. It just wasn't going to work out. But, those are conversations that we're not necessarily always privy to. Sometimes a trade happens and you're like, yeah, I kind of knew that was to be expected. But I think with DeAndre Hopkins, we had little rumblings here and there, but nothing definite. I think that all sort of kind of came together there once we got closer to free agency. And by then we were all out of the building. But certainly we were very surprised by that. Last year when Laramie Tunsil got traded from Miami with Kenny Stills, that was a Saturday right after camp had ended. I was driving around. I had to pull over to the side of the road because I was just like, what just happened? Things like that. Sometimes we had heard that, Miami was not going to deal Tunsil. Their locker room would be in an uproar if they traded a guy as valuable as him. Right. So you heard rumblings of it, but then you thought, you mentally sort of check it off your list. Like, there's no way that they're giving up their starting left tackle. And then boom, the Texans paid a price that the Dolphins were willing to take, and off Laramie came to Houston. And it's really just made a world of difference to our offense and our offensive line. And you hope that a guy like David Johnson, from everything we've seen so far in camp, I mean, man, there's a lot to be excited about. DeAndre Hopkins was a phenomenal playmaker for Houston. And, I loved covering him, but, seeing what David Johnson's done on the field with some of these new pieces and these new wide receivers, this offense looks different, and it looks high-powered, and it looks exciting.
Well, and I wanted to ask you just a little. I want to ask you about Titus Howard after a while, but first, just while we're on David Johnson, so he's out there. I mean, last year it was, people forget last year. If you look at his first 6 games of last season, outside of the Baltimore game, which is a game that you're not going to expect anybody to go run like crazy over the Baltimore defense. But in the games where he was healthy before Arizona traded for Kenyon Drake, that dude was you don't care about fantasy, but like he's a top 5 fantasy back every single week, except for the 1 week versus Baltimore to start last season. Then he gets hurt. It's a back first, and then it's a back, and then some kind of other with back and an ankle. So like he was banged up. He truly didn't look like himself, whenever he tried to come back. And people forget, it wasn't just like thinking, we don't have to think back to 2016 David Johnson to remember seeing David Johnson looking good. We saw David Johnson look good to start last season. So in training camp, does he look healthy? I mean, I've seen him mixing in with the ones on training camp, or just working with the ones on training camp live. But clearly you get to watch all practice. I mean, is he looking good? I mean,
he's out there every single day. Is he taking every single rep with the ones? I mean, no, they're working him in with Duke Johnson, and then they're trying to see what that number 3 spot looks like with Karan Higdon and Scotty Phillips, an undrafted that's there. And of course you've got Buddy Howell, who was a big special teamer last year. David Johnson's been out there every day in practice. And I think if there was any worry about his injury, he would not be practicing, because they definitely evaluated all these guys before camp started, soft tissue evaluation and injury evaluation to see who was sort of at risk, who needed to ramp up slowly. They didn't want to just throw anyone into the mix. But, if you're out there and you're practicing every single day, I have to assume it's because they think that you're good to go and you're healthy. And he said he feels great. When you asked David Johnson what happened last year, he said it was really a low point for him, because at one point he was demoted to the third string back. And I think he knew that it was time for a change for him. He wanted a change. He had changed offensive coordinator several times in the last few years. And I think that all, along with the injury, played a factor into why we didn't see the same David Johnson we saw in 2016. I mean, I remember he was like everybody's keeper in the keeper leagues, right? And then the next year he gets injured before the start of the season. And, it just messed up people's fantasy teams all over the league, and he just never looked the same after that. But that talent level is still there, and the explosiveness looks like it's back, in camp. When you put on the pads and you go against another team, obviously that's going to be the true test. But he's not a rookie. He knows what he can offer to this team, and when you see him out there on the field, he certainly looks the part. I mean, when you see David Johnson carry the ball, like, I got excited seeing that, because of course we all have the same questions of how is he going to look? Is he going to be healthy? It was a hefty price to pay to get David Johnson to Houston. How is it going to pan out for the Texans? But so far, so good. I mean, he's been out there every single day in practice, and I think they, of course, want nothing to happen to David Johnson. So, if he needs a rest day or a break, he's going to come out. I wouldn't worry about that. That's going to be priority number 1, is keeping everyone healthy for week 1.
Do you foresee it being a situation where Duke Johnson's going to be the one in there that's in for all? Because David Johnson was such a good. I mean, I remember back at his Senior Bowl, he came in there and I was like, this guy was a better receiver than he is a runner. He played. Yeah, David Johnson. David Johnson. Yeah, whenever we saw him at the Senior Bowl, but I was just wondering. I first thought to myself, I'm like, if he can't play running back in the league, he could play receiver. Now you bring him in, you have Duke Johnson, who's a receiving back too. I mean, is that going to mean that David Johnson might not get as many receptions just because Duke is going to have to get his share too?
I mean, I think that your primary back is still going to be David Johnson. I think some of them will catch passes out of the backfield. I feel like, and this is totally my opinion, I feel like Duke is going to be the bigger pass catcher, because last year with Carlos Hyde, they both talked about how they could catch passes out of the backfield. But every time Duke was in the game, he wasn't, he had some runs here and there, but mostly he was catching passes. He was a back that caught passes. So I think this year with David Johnson, David can do both, obviously, but if you want someone to run the rock like an every down back, that's going to be David Johnson. And then Duke Johnson's going to go in there to give him some spells of relief here and there. Or sometimes you have a 2-back set and you have them both in there, and then you make defenders have to pick their poison. Who do you defend? Right. So I think the combinations are very, endless because they both have that skill set. But between the two of them, I would expect David Johnson to get the majority of carries, but certainly Duke Johnson's going to get his too.
Okay, so and so we talked about David Johnson's, his injuries earlier. He has that injuries. You mentioned that season after the 2016. I think it was a wrist. I mean, he's been injured, but it's not like it's been one. It isn't like Gurley or something where it's like he's got this knee that has arthritis. It's kind of the same with Will Fuller. He gets injured all the time, but it's not like it's the same. It's a collarbone or it's a knee or it's an ankle. It's like, how does Will Fuller look? What are your expectations for him? I know that you guys had, I think it was you guys had somebody had Deshaun Watson when he was talking about how he was expecting a big year for Will Fuller this year. Do you think he assumes sort of the number one role? They did go out and get Brandon Cooks, but in this shortened offseason, it's Will Fuller that's got the connection already.
I mean, no, Will Fuller, when healthy, he's the number one target on any team. Especially now that DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Will Fuller is the top receiver. His big question is always health until he has that 16-game season. And, no one wants to be on the field more than Will Fuller. I remember being at the Greenbrier a few years ago, and I came home for a few days just to take care of some radio stuff, and then I was going to fly back to the Greenbrier. And that was the day that I left was the day that Fuller landed funny and cracked his collarbone out in West Virginia. And I remember everybody saying, "Why did you leave when you left?" And Will Fuller collarbone, you should have stayed. But he's just the nicest guy. He's the most hardworking guy, and it's always something different. It's just been, I think, just a string of bad luck for him. He was not injured when he was at Notre Dame, and then last year, of course, soft tissue injuries, which are just that type of injury that never quite goes away once the season starts. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. A guy gets a hamstring or something, he sits out for 3 or 4 weeks. You think he's fine. He comes back, plays a game or two, boom, hamstring out again. Like,
when you're so twitchy, like when you're so twitchy, like a Will Fuller, it's just, you're a fine-tuned machine.
Yeah, but to your point, he's worked out this offseason. He came in at about 190. He tried to put on some weight. His big goal every offseason is to get himself stronger so that he doesn't have those sort of injuries. And so you just hope and you cross your fingers that he can play the majority of the season and not have something like that happen to him. He's going to have a huge year. He could be an all-pro if he was healthy all season long. So, I think the big question, Bill O'Brien has said it time and time again, it's going to be health with Will Fuller. But when he's healthy, he is just spectacular. It just changes the Texans' entire offense. Like, when he's on the field, the Texans have and I don't know the exact number, so don't quote me on it, but they have a much more winning record. Their yards, their average yards are much higher. Their average score is much higher with Will Fuller on the field. It just changes everything because defenders have to worry about Fuller, and it opens up the field for so many of the other playmakers. But when Fuller's not on the field, obviously that's one less threat they have to worry about. No one can outrun him. I mean, he's still blazing fast. So I think it'll be exciting to see him on the field, especially alongside Brandon Cooks and Kenny Stills. I mean, this team has got speed now. He's not just the only fastest guy on the team.
I was gonna say if you were gonna put together a list of guys that might be able to outrun him, I mean, Brandon Cooks would have to be on the on the list. I guess it doesn't take you giving us any formational information to know those guys are gonna have to be outside because you got Randall Cobb, who's, anybody with 2 eyes can know that he profiles as a guy out of the slot. Randall Cobb was targeted 85 times last year for Dallas. He seems like he's pretty good receiving. And then you throw in the fact Kenny Stills too. That's a lot of speed on the outside. A guy like Randall Cobb, it feels like it's going to help him, help Deshaun Watson. The improved running game should help Deshaun Watson. I want to ask about offensive line, but first, is there anybody we should be thinking about at the tight end position for the Houston Texans? We know last year Darren Fells kind of fell into the end zone a couple times, but it wasn't anybody where we could depend on him to get any steady volume as far as targets. It seems like between Fuller, Cooks, maybe Kenny Stills, Randall Cobb, and then Duke Johnson, David Johnson. It's like you're playing seventh fiddle if you're a tight end. Is there anybody who might be able to come in and sort of break that mold? I know that at least, is it Kahale Waring there were Kahale Waring. There were a lot of people that were excited about his athletic profile coming out.
Yeah, he's a water polo player. I mean, he looked so big and strong last offseason, and then he was injured, and it just, he started the season off on IR, and it was really a red shirt year for him. And even this year, he's back, but he has his rest days. I want to say that, one day he was out there this week, but for a few days he was just in shorts. I think, it's going to be a tough road for Kahale. He's got a little bit of catching up to do. I think Jordan Thomas was having a phenomenal camp last year. And then he got hurt in that 4th preseason game against Dallas. He got placed on injured reserve. Then he kind of came back off of injured reserve later in the season. And it took him a little while to get reacclimated to football again. So it wasn't quite the season that anyone expected from Jordan Thomas, but he's back out there. He's trimmed down. He's really come back in shape this offseason. And he looks like he looked like a year ago before the injury. So I think a lot of people are really excited about Jordan Thomas. He's really hard to defend. He's got great hands. He used to be a wide receiver. So for him, it was learning how to block, even though he's such a big guy. That was as a rookie. I remember Tim Kelly, who's the offensive coordinator, he used to be the tight ends coach back then. He would take Jordan Thomas off to the side and show him how to block. And a guy so big, you just, he looked like those 80s jerseys, where it's just like the big wide shoulders and the jersey hanging down. He was huge. But, as far as your fantasy owners and tight ends, I don't know if there's any number one tight end you can count on, because Darren Fells, he caught 4 touchdowns last year. I think Jordan Thomas is always in the mix. And then you've got Jordan Akins. So
from UCF,
you might see multiple tight ends in a game at the same time. And I think week to week, it's going to depend who's going to be the top tight end. But Darren Fells, I think he's old and steady. He's the veteran. He knows the position. Deshaun Watson has such a great chemistry with him. He really trusts him. So that chemistry is definitely there. I would expect Fells to be your number one tight end, and then you've got the 2 Jordans right behind him.
Okay, and then and I've kept you best time here, Deepi, but I definitely appreciate it, and everybody appreciates your insight, because as you know, we need football. We need all the information that we can get about it. So what about? So I was going through our offensive line rankings, and we have our grades on these guys as they come out from our scouting evaluations, and also look at some of the stats from places like Pro Football Focus, Sports Info Solutions, who chart some of these players. And as you look at it, it's like the Texans' offensive line, it's been an issue. It's been an issue. And Julian Davenport was not the answer to it. I said it from the very beginning. That guy's not going to answer. That guy's not going to fix the problem. I wasn't sure that Titus Howard was going to fix the problem. But when you add in Laramie Tunsil, you add in Titus Howard, you have Max Sharping coming into his own, you have Nick Martin actually looking like he's basically if he's maybe a little bit better than average NFL center. Pretty good, right? So it's like all of a sudden is it true that there's buzz around there that people close to the program are excited about Titus Howard and what he's been?
Oh, I think the offensive line as a whole, people are very excited about. We've talked actually very little about the offensive line this year, which is unusual since I've been covering the team. I feel like every time I cover the team, we're watching the offensive line, and I'm always jotting down who's lining up where, because this time last year, Titus was pretty much every single position. Max Sharping was sort of all over the place. We didn't really know who the left tackle was because, as you remember, Larry Tunsil got traded after camp was over, right around Labor Day weekend. So, to be able to go into camp and have your same starting 5, that hasn't happened since 2011. Larry Tunsil said it's never happened in his NFL career. And it's just something you can check off your list, that the offensive line as a unit works well together. Titus Howard had a really great rookie season, considering I didn't think he was starting at right tackle. I don't think anyone really knew where he was starting, because he started off at guard, and then because of injuries had to move to tackle, and he did really well there. In fact, when he got hurt in that Kansas City game midseason and then he got carted off the field, I just remember thinking, this is not going to be good. And we can't lose a guy like Titus, which is rare that you would think that about a rookie offensive lineman. I think his coming up through the system really helped. He says that Laramie Tunsil really helped him along. I think Laramie's presence on this offensive line, even though Laramie himself was still getting acclimated to the offense, has been huge for the development of this offensive line. For Titus, for Max Sharping, he's just made everyone better. And I can't help but remember Deshaun Watson's first Pro Bowl. I was in Orlando covering it, and we had him mic'd up. And, that's the year that he had all those sacks, and the offensive line was still like a big question mark, who was starting where. And Von Miller was talking to him mic'd up, and he, they were talking about the sack numbers and what a great season Deshaun still managed to have after 2018. And he said, you just need one tackle. You just need one really good tackle. That'll change the entire offensive line. And I remember thinking, really, just one guy? What if it's just the right tackle? Does it have to be? Could it be anybody? But, I think from a pass rusher like Von Miller to God's ears, that's exactly what happened. You get a guy like Laramie who just has so much talent, and the ceiling is so high for him. And I know people got frustrated with the penalties and the false starts last year. No one was more frustrated than Laramie. He came in this year before anyone could even say anything. He said, I know, I'm going to work on the penalties. But I think he just felt so responsible to get that first jump, that first step off the line. He did not want anyone to lay a hand on Deshaun Watson. And we saw those sack numbers come down. But he came in and he said he owes it to Deshaun Watson and this team to have the best season he's ever had. Like, he's got his contract. He's gotten paid. He's coming off his first Pro Bowl. Laramie Tunsil is in on this team. And I think all the offensive line, their chemistry is so good right now. They move as a unit. Their communication is so good. And, I just think it's something that we haven't talked enough about, because it's not really anything anyone really worries about right now.